Mark Breland has fired back at Deontay Wilder. Wilder, of course, accused Breland several weeks ago of essentially being a double agent for Team Fury. He suggested that Breland stopped the fight at the behest of Team Fury, and he also claimed that his water had been spiked with some type of sedative and that Mark Breland may have been the man behind it. In addition to this, he leveled some accusations at the referee, Kenny Bayless, claiming that Bayless was either drunk or was in on the plot. And he leveled some direct accusations at Tyson Fury as well, claiming that Fury had tampered with his gloves and put egg weights in them, bizarrely. Now, to be fair, boxing does have a long history of these type of shenanigans, but they were mainly in decades long since past. And in this particular instance, Deontay Wilder offers not even a shred of tangible or credible evidence to support his claims. He appears to simply be a fighter who is hopelessly deluded and struggling to come to terms with the fact that he was beaten up by the better man on the night. Now, to address Mark Breland's responses directly, I'm going to be reading quotes from this TalkSport article. If you want to watch the full interview, it is available on YouTube. It's an interview that was conducted by Tunde Ajayi and Spencer Fearon. As I say, I'll be reading the quotes from this TalkSport article. So first of all, he says that him and Deontay are done. He says, with Deontay and I, that's a part of boxing, I guess. His career is done now, so I'm done and he's done. I'm done with him. He says, well, one thing you all like to say is that he's got a lot of power and that's all. I wish him well, and that's it. Only got his power and we'll see how far that takes him. That's all I'm going to say. With regards to the spiked water, he said, I mean, so many people know me. My character speaks for itself. Spiked water? If you're looking at the tapes or whatever, you don't ever see that water in my hand. Someone else has given him the water. And regardless of that, I'm there to help you. My attitude is, when you win, I win. I've seen some foolish people talking about me and talking about that fight. Come on now, only foolish people come out with stuff like that because it's crazy. If you know me, you know me. Goes on to say, with regards to the glove tampering allegations that Wilder leveled at Fury, he said, I doubt it very much. I don't know. I never seen nothing. But still at the same time, he's not going to beat Tyson Fury regardless. JD's was standing right there when the man was getting his hands wrapped. If they put something in there, either Jay's blind or Jay's right there when he's getting his hands wrapped, and he didn't say nothing. But to be honest, that's how much he knows about boxing. Hell, he probably could have put a cast up in there and he wouldn't have known. So he's taking some swipes there at JD's, and I'll come back onto that in a second. Now, this is where it gets a little bizarre, right, from Mark Breland. He said, if I boxed the guys he boxed, and he's talking about Deontay's opposition here, I'd beat them. That's the bottom line. You say he's got good wins. He's got a good win, and he's talking about the Luis Ortiz fight. That's his only good win as far as Mark Breland is concerned on Deontay Wilder's resume. He says that Wilder doesn't really have a jab, and he only used it one time against Berman Stavern. And he says, in training, Wilder doesn't hit the speed bag, he doesn't jump rope, and he doesn't hit the heavy bag. I'll come back onto that as well. Now, first of all, the thing I want to address is what he says about JD's. Now, JD's, as far as I am aware, is the head coach for Deontay Wilder and always was the head coach. Mark Breland was kind of brought in as a secondary coach. Now, situations like that can work as long as the two coaches are on the same page in terms of who is the head coach and who should be the head coach. But in the case of Mark Breland, this is somebody who is a world champion. This is somebody who is a fantastic amateur. This is somebody who has far more hands-on experience in boxing than JD's does. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that Mark Breland's a better trainer, because good fighters or even great fighters don't necessarily make great trainers. And vice versa. You get some fighters who weren't very good, but they make fantastic trainers. And you can find this in many sports, not just boxing. But you do wonder whether there was tension there all along between Mark Breland and JD's because of the fact that, or the possibility that one of them or maybe both of them felt like they should be the head trainer and the other guy shouldn't really be involved. You do wonder if there was that kind of situation going on behind the scenes. And based upon what Mark Breland has said here, taking a swipe at JD's, perhaps there was. Perhaps JD's was somebody who was whispering in Deontay Wilder's ear a lot. And, maybe Mark Breland didn't like that. Maybe Mark Breland felt like JD's was either going behind his back or, we can only speculate. Now, as far as the Deontay Wilder fanboys, they are very hung up on, let's just say, ethnicity. In this particular instance, I want to know how they reconcile the fact that Deontay has chosen to stay with a guy who isn't of the same ethnicity in JD's and fired a guy who is of the same ethnicity in Mark Breland. Going to be interesting to see what their response is on that. And it's just for comedy value because I'm not really interested in what these people think because they're all crazy. But just for entertainment value, sometimes it's a laugh to have a look at what the Deontay Wilder fans are saying. Now, as I say, this is where it gets a little bit Twilight Zone when Mark Breland starts talking about he could beat the people that Deontay's beat. I don't know if he's talking literally or if he's talking stylistically because Mark Breland, was a welterweight. He's now, in his 50s? Surely he doesn't mean that right now in his 50s or even when he was in his prime, he could get in the ring with heavyweights, guys like Stavern and Ortiz and Tyson Fury and all the other guys. Surely he doesn't mean when he was a welterweight contender and champion back in the days, he could have got in there and beaten the guys Deontay's beat literally. Or worse still, him as a 50-odd-year-old man doing it now. I hope he means stylistically. I hope he means his style and his skill set and his knowledge would have been enough to beat all the guys Deontay beat. Okay? Now, as far as what he said about Deontay's training habits, that he doesn't jump rope, he doesn't hit the speed bag, he doesn't hit the heavy bag, I wouldn't necessarily see that as a bad thing because sometimes fans and fighters assume that in order to be the best, in order to be a world champion or just the best version of yourself, you have to use the same training methods and the same training equipment as all the other guys. But that's not the case. You do whatever works for you. Some guys never hit the speed bag at all. And I'm talking about some top-level fighters. Some top-level fighters, certainly in the past, they never hit the pads. Some of them never hit the bag. James Toney was a guy who hated hitting the heavy bag. When he first hooked up with his trainer, Pops Miller, Miller had him hit the heavy bag for like half an hour straight just with the jab. And after that, Toney said he stayed away from the heavy bag for the rest of his career for the most part. He didn't like hitting the heavy bag at all. James Toney favored sparring. That was his favorite thing to do in training was sparring. Chris Eubanks Sr. was like that a lot as well. He loved the sparring. He didn't really like a lot of the other training, and he placed most emphasis on sparring rather than doing the other stuff. Julio Cesar Chavez Sr., he'd never hit pads until very late on in his career when he hooked up with Manny Stewart. Manny Stewart was surprised to learn that Julio Cesar Chavez Sr., who was multi-time world champion by then, he'd never hit the pads before in his life. So I don't think it's necessarily, you have to look at it on a case-by-case basis, but I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing that a fighter like Wilder isn't doing certain things like here. I mean, I don't really place much stock or much importance in hitting the speed bag anyway. I think when that was invented way back in the days, it was a bit of a gimmick, and I still think it is a gimmick now. I don't really see the practical application of training on a speed bag, how that's going to help you in the ring. Maybe it will help you strengthen your shoulders and keep your arms up. Maybe it will help you concentrate on a target. I don't know. But for me personally, from my own boxing experience, I never really gained much hitting a speed bag, and I didn't really do it much. I was far more into sparring, shadow boxing, heavy bag, technical drills, all this kind of stuff, and sprint training, doing a lot of explosive sprint training. But I guess it depends on what kind of fighter you are. Maybe it depends on what your natural aptitudes are. Some fighters might need certain areas of their game boosting, and something like the speed bag might come in handy for that. I don't know. But other fighters who don't need that same area of their game boosting, they're not really going to find much value in using a speed bag, With the heavy bag, a puncher like Deontay not hitting the heavy bag very often is not really a problem because he hits so hard, right? It's not like he's a guy who isn't hitting that hard and you want to try and improve his power, but he's reluctant to hit the bag. No, this is a guy who hits tremendously hard, whether he uses the bag or not. And perhaps Deontay didn't like hitting the bag because of the hand troubles he's had and the arm trouble. I mean, didn't he break his arm or something in one fight? Was it the Chris Arreola fight? So he's kind of brittle like that. He's a bit fragile in terms of his bone structure. So maybe he doesn't like hitting these big heavy bags and stuff like that. Or maybe he finds it boring. Maybe he needs an opponent in front of him. Maybe that's what gets his juices flowing and makes it enjoyable for him to train, Now, as I say, hopefully Mark Breland is talking stylistically when he says he could beat Deontay's opponents, but he might not be, because he goes on to say that he could beat Anthony Joshua. And this is real Twilight Zone stuff. Now, this is not the first time that Mark Breland has said some stuff which is way out there. I remember in the lead up to one of the Fury fights, it may have been the first Fury fight. Can't remember if it was the first or second, but Breland came out and basically said that Tyson Fury can't box. And that was a real eye-opener to me, because I was thinking, did you see the Vladimir Klitschko fight? I mean, maybe he wasn't explaining himself well, I don't know. But to say that Tyson Fury can't box and he doesn't really have much in his arsenal was an absolutely bizarre thing for Mark Breland to say. And at the time, I did a video saying that Mark Breland is clearly caught up in the Deontay Wilder / PBC cult of delusion, because he was coming out saying all kind of delusional stuff. And maybe that is still the case. Maybe he was caught up in that cult of delusion, and maybe he's still in it to some degree. With that being said, Mark Breland, again, has a lot of experience, amateur and pro. He was a world champion. He was a Kronk fighter and a bit of a legend in that Kronk gym. And looking at the Deontay Wilder-Tyson Fury rematch, he did have Deontay Wilder's best interests at heart when he stopped the fight when he did. So it is what it is. But Mark Breland himself is not exactly infallible. He's not somebody who every word that comes out of his mouth I'm going to take as gospel truth, or every analysis he offers I'm going to take as accurate and a good assessment, because what he says about Anthony Joshua, what he says about Deontay Wilder's opponents in the sense that he feels he could beat them, again, if he's talking about stylistically, okay, but I don't know, man. I think that he might actually be talking about literally, Now, with regards to what he says about AJ, he says he doesn't have a jab at all. When he fought Ruiz in the second fight, people talked about the jab. That wasn't a jab. He was just doing feints. To fight a guy like him, I would out-jab him. I don't think he'd be able to touch me. I'd put him to sleep. The jab can bang that chin and put you down. Fury would beat him up. He's good at mind games. He plays with these guys. He's playing with their heads, and guys get mad or frustrated. So frustrated it can throw them off their game. I'm a fighter. I watch boxing. I watch fighters. From my eyes and what I see, I could beat him. He's just straightforward. He's not hard to hit. There you go. What do you guys think? Could a 50-something-year-old former welterweight, world level welterweight, beat Anthony Joshua today, who's in his early 30s and a unified world heavyweight champion, 6'6", 240 pounds. Mark Breland, let's say he was a welterweight back in the day. Right now he's in his 50s. I think he's about 6'1", 6'2", Mark Breland. I mean, I wouldn't give Mark Breland much chance, would you? Let me know what you guys think in the comments below. It's the bizarre saga of Deontay Wilder. And even though Breland is more realistic than Deontay, not as deluded as Deontay, to me, he still comes across as deluded to some extent. So the whole Deontay Wilder world, everyone associated with that team is either delusional or they've got ulterior motives and they're very manipulative and they're manipulating Deontay. I don't think Breland was one of the guys who was manipulating Deontay. I suspect, I'm not making any accusations here, but I suspect that the likes of JD's, Shelly Finkel, and perhaps even Al Heyman were manipulating Deontay. Yeah? Those guys to me don't come across as delusional, but potentially they could be manipulative. Whereas Breland, to some degree, delusional, but I think he had honest intentions. And as delusional as he may have been and may still be to some degree, you need to have people with honest intentions in your team. You need to have people that actually have your best interests at heart. But Deontay, not being a very bright guy, cannot tell the difference between those with honest intentions and those who are manipulating him. Deontay appears to be somebody who is so egotistical at this point that anybody who blows smoke up his backside, he wants to retain and keep them on the team. But anybody who tells him some home truths and tries to bring it back down to reality, he wants to kick them off the team. So anyway, let me know what you guys think about all this in the comments below. Come and join me on Patreon and access my weekly no-holds-barred, censorship-free podcast where we lift the lid on a wide range of controversial topics. It's not mainstream friendly, it's not politically correct, but that's the whole point. We dare to stand as a beacon of reason against an army of insanity. Just head on over to my Patreon page and select the tier called Hatman Hot Topics. You'll gain access to a minimum of 2 hours of exclusive content every single week, including podcasts, videos, interviews, live stream Q&A sessions, as well as my popular Confessions of a Nightclub Bouncer series. Not to mention a vast back catalog of hundreds of hours of previous episodes. You can listen via the Patreon app with the option to download in high quality MP3. We've also got a Discord server where you can come and chat and hang out with myself and other members. There's no contract, no commitment, and you can cancel at any time. So come and join our community of free and critical thinkers by signing up with me here on Patreon today.